Hey guys, welcome. We're going to finish up World War I today by taking a look at this essential question, which is what are some of the main ideas about President Wilson and about the end of the First World War? And so we're going to start, of course, with Woodrow Wilson. If you were here with us in class, you know that there's definitely some controversies about Wilson and his presidency. Yes, he is the president that leads us through the First World War, but he also has a terrible record with civil rights as a known segregationist. So we're going to start with looking at his foreign policy. And I know we've talked about foreign policy before, but just a refresher, this means we're going to be looking at how Woodrow Wilson conducts business and leads the United States in our dealing with other countries. So war is a great example of foreign policy because global warfare includes lots of other powers and lots of other countries. So I want to start by reviewing the Treaty of Versailles. And of course, if you were here in the last class, we talked about how the Treaty of Versailles was the treaty that ends World War I. And we looked at a political cartoon I'll show again on the next slide. But something really important to know about how World War I ends is what's sort of referenced here in this cartoon, which is that it forces Germany to take the blame for the war and pay what's called reparations. And what I mean by reparations, and this was the cartoon we looked at in our breakout EDU challenge, reparations means Germany is forced to pay the debt or the money for war damages, meaning they're taking the blame. We're calling it their fault, even though Germany never started this war, right? Think back to our bodies on the floor. This war starts with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife from Austria-Hungary. This isn't German aggression starting the war. And so, being forced to pay the debt to the tune of $55 billion is quite a serious amount of money. And when we think back into our history, we can see that this type of burden, this amount of debt, is a perfect way for a new party to rise in Germany, and that is the Nazi Party. And so we can kind of look back and see maybe this was not the best choice, as it actually led to some extremism in Germany after feeling quite burned, having to pay all of this money for a war they never started. One last thing about foreign policy and Woodrow Wilson is his attempt to start what's called the League of Nations. The League of Nations does not exist, but the idea was that we could have an international peacekeeping force or a group that would be able to fix conflict without the use of any military force. This would be, the idea of a higher power where conflicts could be solved before war breaks out, and this never ends up happening. But eventually, we do have the United Nations, or the UN, which is a similar group that exists in our world today. But let's go ahead and shift to domestic policy, right? Meaning what is up in the United States, in our country, under Woodrow Wilson. And we'll start with the revisiting of something we've talked about before, and that is women's suffrage. I really like this picture. This is real. These are women picketing outside the White House. I know it's hard to see, but it is back here. And this sign says, "Mr. President," meaning Woodrow Wilson, "how long must women wait for liberty? And what are you going to do for women's suffrage?" And so Wilson is president when suffrage, or the right to vote, is passed, specifically for women. The 19th Amendment is the amendment in our Constitution, which allows all women the right to vote. So that's a major thing that happens with Woodrow Wilson at home. And to finish up today, I've got one more bill for you, and that's called the Sedition Act. Back in 1918, as World War I is coming to an end. And this is another controversial piece of legislation that Woodrow Wilson supported. And what it did was ban any speech or personal opinion that someone might express that in any way made the U.S. war effort look bad. So if anyone was to say, don't buy a war bond. This war is stupid. Like, you could be charged or fined for saying something like that. And obviously, as a country that values free speech, it's our First Amendment, that is quite controversial because we're supposed to allow people to say what they think and feel without worrying that it's going to come back to bite them. So that's going to be it for today, guys, in our notes. We also have a summary box. I'm expecting you to fill that one out in your own words. What did you learn? What are these notes all about? 1 to 2 sentences max. And you're going to go on to our stations and our bigger project for the day, which is our documentary and product you're going to produce based on the question I ask. All right, guys, thanks for listening.